The distress signal. The research vessel. Stellar Whisper drifted helplessly through the crimson clouds of the Maelstrom Nebula, its elegant crystalline hull flickering with dying energy patterns. Inside the command center, Science Director Valara pressed her 4 delicate hands against the navigation console, her iridescent skin pulsing with waves of distress colors that her species, the Zilani, used to communicate emotion. The ship had been conducting routine stellar measurements when a gravitational anomaly had pulled them deep into the nebula's electromagnetic storms. Now, 3 solar cycles later, their engines were dead, their food synthesizers were failing, and their atmospheric processors were running on emergency power. The 23 members of her research team huddled in the central chamber, conserving what little warmth remained as the ship's temperature dropped steadily toward the freezing point of their bodily fluids. Valera's second-in-command, a young Zilani named Korvax, approached with careful movements that betrayed his exhaustion. His normally bright purple coloration had faded to a dull gray, indicating severe stress and malnutrition. The emergency beacon had been transmitting for 72 hours, but the nebula's interference made it impossible to know if anyone had received their desperate call for help. The Galactic Harmony Alliance had strict protocols for rescue operations. The nearest patrol ship from the benefactor species would typically respond within 40 hours. The benefactors were known throughout the galaxy for their advanced medical technology and their sworn oath to preserve all sentient life. But the nebula was on the edge of chartered space, far from normal trade routes, and the electromagnetic interference would make their small research vessel nearly impossible to locate. Valara had already accepted that they might not survive this ordeal. The Zilani were a peaceful species who had evolved on a garden world with stable climates and abundant resources. They had developed space travel through mathematics and philosophy rather than conflict and competition. Their bodies were fragile compared to most spacefaring species, requiring specific atmospheric conditions and unable to withstand the physical stresses that others took for granted. As she reviewed their dwindling options, the ship's damaged sensors detected something approaching through the nebula's chaotic energy fields. Multiple contacts, moving in formation with a precision that seemed impossible given the electromagnetic interference. Valera's heart began beating rapidly in her chest, hope flooding through her consciousness like a warm current. But as the sensor readings became clearer, that hope transformed into something else entirely. The approaching vessels were not the smooth, organic curves of benefactor rescue ships. They were not the crystalline structures favored by the Harmony Alliance. These ships were angular, aggressive, built from dark metal with prominent weapon arrays and reinforced armor plating. They moved through the nebula's storms as if the dangerous conditions were merely a slight inconvenience. Korvax's coloration shifted to deep black, the Zilani expression of absolute terror. He had recognized the configuration of the approaching fleet. These were human vessels, the warships of the species that the entire galaxy spoke of in hushed, frightened whispers. Humans came from a world that other species classified as a death world, a planet so hostile that it should have been impossible for intelligent life to evolve there. Earth, as the humans called their homeworld, was a nightmare by galactic standards. It had unpredictable weather systems that could destroy entire cities, tectonic plates that shifted and caused devastating earthquakes, vast oceans filled with predators, and a surface that experienced deadly radiation from their yellow sun. The gravity was so intense that most species would be crushed within minutes of landing. The atmospheric composition included oxygen at levels that would cause most beings to suffer toxic shock. Even their moon caused massive tidal forces that regularly reshaped their coastlines. The humans who had survived and thrived in such conditions were unlike anything else in the galaxy. They were persistence predators who could chase prey for days without rest. Their bodies could survive injuries that would kill any Zilani instantly. They consumed foods that were toxic to most species, including a substance called capsaicin that they used for flavoring, but which was classified as a chemical weapon by the Harmony Alliance. Their history was filled with conflict so brutal that reading about them had caused several Zilani historians to require psychological treatment. Valera watched the human fleet approaching with a mixture of awe and dread. The largest ship was easily 10 times the size of their research vessel, bristling with weapons that could reduce a small moon to dust. The humans had only made contact with the galactic commune 50 years ago, but in that time, they had earned a reputation as unstoppable warriors who solved every problem with violence and intimidation. The communication system crackled to life, and a deep voice spoke in accented galactic standard. The human language required vocal cords capable of producing harsh, guttural sounds that the Zilani found physically painful to hear. The translation software struggled with the message, but the meaning was clear enough. This was Admiral Chen of the Terran Relief Force, and they had received the distress signal. They were coming aboard to render assistance. The phrasing was polite, even formal, but Valera could not shake the feeling that they had just exchanged one form of death for another. Stories circulated throughout the galaxy of human boarding parties who took ships by force, their soldiers wearing powered armor that made them nearly invincible. The docking procedure was surprisingly gentle. Valera had expected the humans to cut through their hull with plasma torches or explosive charges, but instead they used some kind of adaptive seal that connected to their airlock without damaging the crystalline structure. The human engineers who entered first were not the hulking warriors she had imagined. They were various sizes and colors, wearing environmental suits that obscured their features, but moving with a careful precision that spoke of extensive training. The one who appeared to be their leader removed his helmet once the airlock cycled, revealing a human face that Valera found difficult to read. Humans had mobile facial features that they used for communication, but the subtle movements were lost on someone who communicated through color changes. He had dark hair cut short in what she assumed was a military style, and eyes that seemed to take in every detail of their ship's interior. He introduced himself as Lieutenant Commander James Park, a rescue specialist with something called the Terran Relief Force. His tone was professional but warm, lacking the aggression Valera had expected. He immediately began asking questions about their life support requirements, medical needs, and the number of crew requiring evacuation. When young Timel, barely past childhood, cowered behind Valera in obvious terror, the human did something unexpected. He knelt down, making himself smaller and less threatening, and pulled something from his equipment belt. It was a small device that projected holographic images of various alien species, including Zilani, living on human space stations and colonies. The images showed them appearing comfortable, even happy, working alongside humans in what looked like peaceful cooperation. Thimel's coloration shifted slightly from black fear to gray uncertainty, which seemed to encourage the human. More humans entered the ship, bringing equipment that Valera did not recognize. They moved with efficiency, but also with obvious care not to damage anything or frighten the crew further. One of them, a female human with skin darker than Commander Park's, began setting up what appeared to be a portable atmospheric processor. She worked quickly, but took the time to explain each step to Korvax, who watched with a mixture of fear and fascination. The humans had brought food supplies, but they had clearly done their research. Instead of offering their own toxic cuisine, they had synthesized nutritional paste specifically formulated for Zilani biology. It was not appetizing, but it was safe and would keep them alive. The gesture showed a level of consideration that contradicted everything Valera had been told about human behavior. As the rescue operation continued, Valera found herself studying the humans with scientific curiosity rather than fear. They communicated constantly with each other through small radio devices, coordinating their efforts with military precision. But she also observed them making what appeared to be jokes, laughing at shared references she did not understand. They showed concern for each other's safety, double-checking equipment and offering assistance without being asked. The most surprising moment came when their chief engineer, an older human with gray hair and scarred hands, discovered the Stellar Whisper's damaged navigation array. The crystalline matrix that controlled their faster-than-light travel had been shattered by the gravitational anomaly. It was technology that had taken the Zilani centuries to perfect, and Valara had assumed it was beyond repair. The human engineer studied it for several minutes, then began pulling tools from his kit that looked crude and primitive compared to Zilani technology. He started working on the array with a combination of delicate precision and what could only be described as percussive maintenance, actually striking certain components with a small hammer. Valara wanted to protest, but something in his confident movements made her remain silent. To her amazement, the array began to show signs of power restoration. The human had not fully repaired it. That would require specialized facilities, but he had managed to restore partial functionality through methods that seemed to violate several laws of physics, as the Zilani understood them. When she asked how he had done it, he simply smiled and said something about duct tape and WD-40, which the translator could not interpret. The unexpected heroes. As the human rescue team continued their work aboard the Stellar Whisper, Valara found herself in the unusual position of serving as liaison between her terrified crew and these strange beings from the deathworld. Admiral Chen had contacted her directly, his image appearing on their communication screen from the bridge of the human flagship, which they called the TRF Endeavor. The admiral was not what Valara had expected from a human military commander. His face showed lines that humans apparently developed with age, and his expression seemed kind rather than harsh. He explained that the Terran Relief Force was a new initiative, created specifically to provide humanitarian aid throughout the galaxy. The humans had realized that their reputation as dangerous warriors was preventing other species from accepting their help, even in life-threatening situations. The rescue plan the Admiral outlined was ambitious and dangerous. The nebula's electromagnetic storms were intensifying, and they needed to evacuate the Zilani crew before the Stellar Whisper's hull was compromised. But the standard evacuation procedure, transferring crew members through the docking tunnel, would take too long. Instead, the humans proposed something that made Valara's coloration shift to white with shock. They wanted to use something called emergency transport pods, individual capsules that would launch from the Stellar Whisper and be caught by the Endeavor's recovery systems. It was a technique humans had developed for combat situations, allowing them to quickly evacuate personnel from damaged vessels under fire. The procedure had a success rate of 97%, which the humans seemed to consider acceptable, but which terrified the Zilani. Commander Park must have sensed their fear because he offered to demonstrate the procedure himself first. He sealed himself into one of the pods, a cramped cylinder barely large enough for a single human, and allowed his team to launch him toward the Endeavor. Valara watched through the viewport as the pod shot through the swirling crimson clouds, buffeted by electromagnetic discharge that would have destroyed their research shuttle. The Endeavor's recovery arm snatched it from space with mechanical precision, and moments later, Park's voice came through the communicator confirming his safe arrival. The demonstration helped, but the Zilani were still paralyzed with fear. Their species had evolved as careful planners, taking time to consider every option before acting. The idea of launching themselves into a hostile nebula in tiny pods went against every instinct they possessed. Valara knew they were running out of time, but she could not force her crew to do something that terrified them so completely. It was then that the humans did something extraordinary. Instead of becoming frustrated or forcing the evacuation, they adapted their approach. The medical officer, a woman named Dr. Sarah Kim, began working with the Zilani crew to understand their fear responses. She discovered that their color-changing ability was not just communication, but also a sophisticated emotional regulation system. By helping them consciously control their coloration, she could actually reduce their physiological stress responses. Meanwhile, the other humans began modifying the transport pods, adding transparent viewports so the Zilani would not feel as confined, and installing communication systems that would allow them to stay in constant contact during the transfer. They even programmed the pod's interior lighting to shift through calming color patterns that Dr. Kim had identified as soothing to the Zilani nervous system. The youngest crew member, Thymel, surprised everyone by volunteering to go first. The child had been watching the humans work and had developed what appeared to be trust in them. Commander Park personally helped Thymel into the modified pod, showing him how the safety systems worked and promising to be waiting on the other side. When the pod launched, every Zilani watched in tense silence, their colors shifting through rapid patterns of anxiety. The 30 seconds it took for the pod to reach the Endeavor felt like an eternity. But then Thymel's voice came through the communicator, high-pitched with excitement rather than fear, describing the inside of the human ship with wonder. His successful transfer gave the others courage, and one by one, they began to enter the pods. Valara insisted on being the last to leave, following the tradition of captains throughout the galaxy. As Commander Park helped her into the final pod, she asked him a question that had been bothering her since the humans arrived. Why were they really doing this? The Zilani had nothing to offer in trade, no military alliance to propose, no technology the humans could not develop themselves. Why risk their lives for strangers who had been taught to fear them? Park's answer was not what she expected. He told her about something called the Coast Guard on Earth, humans who dedicated their lives to saving others from the sea. He spoke of mountain rescue teams who climbed into deadly conditions to help stranded climbers. He described firefighters who ran into burning buildings while everyone else ran out. He said that humans had a phrase, "so others may live," that some of them took as a personal creed. The pod launch was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The nebula's energy discharges created a light show that would have been beautiful if it were not so deadly. The pod shook violently, and, for a moment, Valara thought the humans had miscalculated. But then she felt the solid thunk of the recovery arm connecting, and she was pulled into the safety of the Endeavor's docking bay. The human ship was nothing like she had imagined. Instead of the dark, militaristic corridors she had expected, the Endeavor was bright and surprisingly comfortable. The humans had even modified a section to match Zilani atmospheric requirements, showing a level of preparation that suggested they had been ready to rescue any species they might encounter. The crew areas had artwork from various Earth cultures, plants growing in hydroponic gardens, and what appeared to be a recreational area where off-duty humans were playing some kind of game involving a small white ball on a green table. The Zilani crew was given quarters that had been hastily but thoroughly modified for their comfort. The humans had researched their dietary needs, sleep cycles, and social structures. They had even programmed their entertainment system with Zilani music and literature, though Valara suspected the humans found both incomprehensible. Over the next several days, as the Endeavor carefully navigated out of the nebula, Valara had the opportunity to observe humans in their own environment. She watched them train in their gymnasium, pushing their bodies to limits that seemed impossible. She saw them eat meals that included foods toxic enough to be classified as weapons. She observed their sleep cycles, which were shockingly short by galactic standards, requiring only 8 hours of rest in each cycle. But she also saw them caring for a collection of small Earth creatures they called pets, showing gentleness that contradicted their fearsome reputation. She watched them create art and music, forms of expression that were crude by Zilani standards, but contained an emotional intensity that was almost overwhelming. She observed their medical team treating injured crew members with technology that was decades behind galactic standard, but applied with innovation and creativity that made it remarkably effective. Dr. Kim spent considerable time with the Zilani crew, studying their biology and teaching them about human physiology in return. She explained that humans were not naturally violent, but their evolution on a hostile world had given them the capacity for violence when necessary. They were persistence hunters, yes, but they were also persistence protectors, capable of enduring enormous hardship to save others. The most illuminating conversation came when Valara was invited to dine with Admiral Chen. The meal was carefully prepared to be safe for her consumption, though she noticed the Admiral adding something called hot sauce to his portion that made her atmospheric sensors register it as a hazardous material. He told her about Earth's history, acknowledging the wars and conflicts that had shaped humanity, but also speaking of the times when humans had come together to help each other through disasters and tragedies. He explained that when humanity had learned they were not alone in the universe, there had been two predominant reactions. Some had wanted to conquer and dominate, driven by the same competitive instincts that had helped them survive on Earth, but others had seen an opportunity to be something more, to use their unique capabilities to help species who had evolved in gentler circumstances. The Terran Relief Force was the result of that second vision. The Admiral showed her recordings of other rescue operations the TRF had conducted. They had pulled a colony ship of crystalline beings from a collapsing star's gravity well. They had delivered medical supplies to a world suffering from a plague, working around the clock to synthesize a cure. They had even stood between a peaceful farming colony and a pirate fleet, using their reputation as dangerous warriors to avoid actual conflict. As the Endeavour approached the nearest Harmony Alliance station, Valera realized that everything the galaxy thought it knew about humans was both true and incomplete. Yes, they were dangerous. Their bodies were powerful, their technology was often crude but effective, and their capacity for violence was genuinely frightening. But those same qualities that made them dangerous also made them incredible protectors. When they finally arrived at the station, the Zelani crew's rescue had already become news throughout the sector. Other species who had avoided humans were beginning to reconsider their positions. The image of human soldiers gently helping frightened Zelani children into escape pods was spreading through the galactic communication networks, challenging long-held prejudices. Before departing the Endeavour, Valera formally thanked Admiral Chen and his crew. She told him that the Zelani would be submitting a report to the Galactic Council, recommending that the Terran Relief Force be granted official status as an emergency response organization. It was a small gesture, but one that might help change how the galaxy saw humanity. Commander Park was there to see them off, and Thymel actually hugged the human, a gesture that would have been unthinkable days earlier. Park seemed touched by the child's trust, and Valera saw him quickly wipe at his eyes, a human expression of emotion she had learned to recognize. As the Zelani boarded the station, Valera turned back to look at the Endeavour one last time. The ship that had terrified her when it first appeared now seemed like a guardian, its weapon arrays not threats, but shields for those who could not protect themselves. The humans were returning to the nebula, having detected another distress signal from a cargo vessel caught in the storms. The galaxy had been wrong about humanity, Valera realized. They were not monsters from a death world. They were survivors who had learned that the same strength that allowed them to endure could be used to ensure others survived as well. They were warriors, yes, but they were also healers, engineers, and protectors. They were proof that evolution on a hostile world did not necessarily create hostile beings. In her report to the Galactic Council, Valera would write something that would be quoted for generations. We awaited salvation from the stars, expecting the gentle touch of the benefactors or the elegant efficiency of the Harmony Alliance. Instead, the Death World sent its children to save us, and in their strength, we found a gentleness we had not expected. In their crude technology, we found innovation. In their dangerous reputation, we found safety. The humans came not as conquerors, but as guardians, asking nothing in return except the opportunity to help. Perhaps it is time we stopped fearing the warriors from Earth and started being grateful that when the darkness comes, they are willing to stand between us and harm. The story of the Stellar Whisper's rescue would spread throughout known space, carried by traders and travelers to every inhabited world. It would be told in different ways by different species, but the core message would remain the same. When you are lost in the void, when hope seems gone, when death appears certain, sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected source. Sometimes it comes from those evolution shaped to be dangerous, because they are the only ones strong enough to face the danger on your behalf. And in the depths of space, the Terran Relief Force continued their mission, one rescue at a time, slowly changing the galaxy's understanding of what it meant to be human.